Hello, welcome to Longhaus TV, the research channel. Today we're crossing to Sydney. We have with us Andy Ingram. Andy is the Senior Vice President and Managing Director of Data Center at Juniper Networks. Andy, welcome to the show.
Scott, it's great to be here. Thanks for the invite.
So Andy, I guess today would be good to focus a little bit on QFabric. So the reason being that I went to San Francisco early in the year and was there for the QFabric launch. And it was obviously there was a lot of very excited people at Juniper about QFabric, about its potential, and almost the industry changing view of how this would change the paradigm of the data center. So I'm intensely interested to see and hear how's it gone. I mean, coming into the end of this year, has it been what Juniper expected?
Yeah, so we started shipping the fabric in September, which is the schedule we were expecting. So we're very excited about that. And we're in early sort of tests and rollout and trials with a number of really interesting customers who have really demanding data center challenges that they're trying to resolve. And the fabric is the right answer for those kind of problems.
Yeah, so one thing I did feel that after the QFabric launch, I wondered how it would go in the Australian market, in the sense that it seemed to be very much around, if you're building a new data center, a very big data center, so I was kind of curious to see how it would go in a couple of areas, and maybe we can cover a few of those today. Things like, what's the business value for an enterprise data center, a CIO? So what are the problems that Juniper or QFabric particularly solve for the enterprise?
So when you look at data centers in the enterprise, what's going on now are the people who are trying to build clouds. So that's the marketing term, but really what they're trying to do is to build a more virtualized, more efficient data center where they're using their resources more effectively, and they're able to be a bit more agile in terms of being able to try out new applications, get them up and running sooner, scale them up if necessary, or take them down if they're not successful. And underlying that, when you start building a cloud, you start building pools of resources, what ties all the resources together is a network. And unfortunately, it's actually multiple networks. And the architectures that are deployed in most data centers today, particularly in enterprise data centers, are really not up to the task. And the challenge is the very architecture gets in the way of being able to create a more virtualized, simple environment. And it really comes down to the fact that we've been deploying tree structures in networks for years. And what the data center wants is a much flatter sort of any-to-any type of connection. So it doesn't matter where I put a workload, it doesn't matter where I move a virtual machine or install a piece of physical equipment, everything in the data center is sort of equally distant from each other. And so the problem that we're trying to solve is to change that architecture. And so QFabric is the first of its kind in terms of creating a true data center fabric, where everything in the data center is equal distance, everything is one network hop away. And the value proposition is really three things. It builds a better foundation so that people can build those clouds, those virtualized resources. In most cases for enterprise, that would be a private cloud, it would be small or growing over time. In other cases, it would be a public cloud, so a public service provider providing cloud services, and we can solve both types of problems. So we have that perfect foundation, if you will, to build that cloud. But also, we can solve problems where applications want to go fast. Now, there's two ways in which data center managers are evaluated. One is based upon user experience, how the users experience the applications themselves, and the other is upon cost. So one of the things that the QFabric will do is will make every application run better. Now there are some industries like financial services, high frequency trading, or high performance computing such as oil and gas, seismic processing, where speed matters, time is money. But every application can benefit from having lower network latencies because it will make the application run better and the users will have a better experience. The third aspect is that a fabric well designed like QFabric is inherently simpler, right? There's just fewer components that make up the network. And so what you get is a certain efficiency. There's lower power, space, and cooling requirements, but also it's simpler to manage. A well-designed fabric is managed as a single device, not many devices all managed independently like a typical network. And when you have that, then the opportunity to reduce the errors caused by carbon life forms is improved dramatically. And then finally, because there's less equipment, it costs us less to build it, it will cost our customers less to buy it, and less to operate it. And it's not that often that you really get something that is both this much better in terms of flexibility, in terms of performance, user experience, and efficiency. At the same time, it costs less. And it occurs when you have an architectural change. We're changing the way the network behaves. In fact, we're causing the network to behave like a single switch.
Yeah, so I was certainly very impressed with that flatter architecture and the ability of QFabric to, you know, edge to edge. I think that you guys were quoting 5 milliseconds or something at the launch, and it was certainly very impressive having that intuitive single device managing the data center, and each switch sort of was able to basically, you know, find where any other switch in that environment without having to go up through that sort of hierarchy topology. So I was very impressed with that. But how do you deal with you know, existing data centers and really their inability to do any kind of real rip and replace, and the investment already in the equipment that they have there? So, I mean, when you launched QFabric, you had a top-of-the-rack switch. So I'm understanding now is that all those units in the architecture are available. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I think when you look at a data center, you think of it as a living, breathing organism. You don't want to do a major rip and replace, but it is constantly evolving over time. And one of the things that drives evolution most of all are the servers themselves. In a typical enterprise data center, maybe a server has a 5-year life. Now, why is that? Because if I was to compare an E7, the new E7 processor from Intel, put that into a server and compare that to a 5-year-old server running a dual-core Pentium 4-based Xeon processor, what you're going to find is the new server is someplace between 5 and 15 times greater throughput, which means I can take out my 5-year-old servers, maybe 5 of them, and replace them with one of the new servers. So there's a clear ROI for doing that. But as you evolve your data center, you will also want to involve the network connection to those new servers. So let's say if I have a 5-year life on servers, every year I'm going to replace about 1/5 of my servers. And so I'm going to take a section of my data center. It might be a few racks, it might be a whole pod, and I'm going to replace the new servers. And that's the first and only time in the next 5 years I'm hoping to be touching the rack and rewiring it. So I want to make sure I get the right network connection. So what I would recommend is our QFX 3500, a 10 gig top of the rack switch. And most new servers coming out this year and beyond will be 10 gig attached, particularly in a virtualized data center, because it's the best long-term investment you can make to get that flexibility in the right infrastructure. So with a 10 gig connect, you put a 3500 in, and then you can connect that to your existing infrastructure in the data center, which probably is Catalyst based. You might have a distribution and a core tier above that. So it really just becomes an access switch. And I can do multiple racks with that, and I can grow it over time. At some point in time, though, I'm going to find that the next layer up in my network becomes the bottleneck, in which case I can then take the 3500 and evolve it into the fabric itself. Now, the fabric is really just a very distributed switch. So it becomes a big access switch. And I can reconnect that to all the other parts of my data center using layer 2 or layer 3, connecting into the core or up into the router, depending upon what works best for your environment. Now, over time, I can continue then to grow the fabric, because I can start it really small. And I can grow it over time to a maximum of 6,144 10 gig ports. Now that's big enough to cover almost all data centers inside of Australia. I can even use that as the core for my existing infrastructure. So let's say I have, racks of servers that are maybe 1 gig attached. They're currently connected up to a Catalyst distribution layer, and I want to be able to upgrade my Catalyst switches so I could actually swap those out and use the fabric itself as the core. So it's very simple to start small, non-disruptive, and evolve over time as my data center evolves to 10 gig type of servers, and ultimately have my entire data center be connected by a fabric. That's one of the key designs of a well-designed fabric.
Okay, well that's great, Andy. So, okay, that answers that question in relation to a roadmap, if you like, mixing the old and the new. How well received has QFabric been in Australia?
Actually, I think it's been well received. There's some concern that it's too big. And so it's important that because we always talk about how big it can get, but we're also talking now about how small it can get. And particularly as we get into early next year, as part of the roadmap, we have what we call our microfabric, the ability to start at a much lower cost point and be able to evolve very gracefully over time. I think what really resonates here in Australia is just the whole idea of simplifying the data center network. That what we have out there has too many tiers, too many separate devices, and there's multiple ways that we can help customers simplify the data center networks. And we've been helping them go to 2 tiers now for about 3.5 years. And QFabric represents the next step. And so we have a number of different customers we've been talking to, some for a number of years now, that are very interested in heading down this road with us. So I think it's definitely resonating. But on hand, overall, I think the Australian market's pretty conservative, particularly in the enterprise side. And so it's going to be an evolution over time as people move in this direction. But just looking at the technology, thinking about where people need their data centers to go, I would say 10 years from now, all new data center networks inside of a data center in Australia will in fact be a fabric topology.
So Andy, I'm interested, big data. So we hear a lot about it. We hear a lot about, data storage, data in motion, and this big problem of big data. So I'm just curious, how is that entering the conversation of QFabric?
So I heard a very interesting factoid the other day that in the year 2006, the world generated and stored more data and information than in the entire history of mankind. So the acceleration of data has been something that's been going on for forever, really. And what happens now is that it's much easier to process that data when you have a flat fabric because the location of the data becomes less relevant. The ability to move it around the data center goes up. If the latency has been reduced, the ease of moving it becomes greater. And so I can begin to process more data. So QFabric is the perfect answer to building large compute environments or large storage environments that can not only store the data, but process the data and turn that data into information, turn it into business advantage. I was talking to someone in the healthcare industry the other day. We were remarking on the fact that we've been able to map the genome. And he said, you know what? That's just the beginning. What we want to do is be able to map your genome, your kid's genome, your parents' genome, your grandparents' genome, and then do that for everybody, build a giant database, and then be able to run correlation analysis against this and begin to really figure out when these genes change or these genes are in this sequence, what does that mean? And we can be able to get much clearer information. Well, that's an extreme case of big data, but something like QFabric is the perfect answer to both handle the compute to process it, as well as the storage to maintain it and protect the data.
Yeah, we often talk about the fact that they mapped the human genome, and it took 1,000 scientists, but in quite a remarkably short period of time, and yet in the enterprise space, we find it very difficult to map enterprise data and deal with the volume of data that we have to deal with there. So, it is an interesting parallel. So, Andy, I understand you're here for a data center summit. Tell me, how are you finding Australia?
Well, I've been talking to customers and partners in the country here. It was in Sydney, then I've been down in Melbourne, back up here to Sydney. And first of all, it's always great to be in Australia. It's nice to have it be summer because it's winter back home. It is a little strange to see Christmas trees in the summertime, but I guess that's something you can get used to. But it's just, I love the market here, and I think it's just a really important place for us to be successful. And I think we have a lot to offer to help customers in the country here.
Well, that's really, really great to hear that you are focusing on the Australian market. Certainly great to see you, and it's great to hear that QFabric is certainly ticking along, and we'll definitely be watching it with a lot of interest and no doubt talking to a lot of clients about QFabric. So thank you, Andy. Thank you very much for the information. Thanks for joining us on Longhaus TV.
Scott, it was my pleasure.